check. Wandered off without my mobile phone again. Never mind. Thought I'd tell you about these two saws. They're both MS362 Stihls. See? And they're the same but different. And I'll explain why. This one on this right hand side is one of mine. It was given to me when I did some work up in Surrey, and it had a couple of incipient issues. Although it was a running saw, a saw that was running. This one here belongs to people I work for, fix saws for, and it's basically made out of an accumulation of parts selectively assembled from saws that have died. I'll explain about that in a moment. This is the more modern one. It's an MS362CM M-tronic, and this one is an MS362C. It says exactly the same on all sides of these saws, but this one is a pre-M-tronic. See the difference in the top covers, and if you look at this side of the top cover, no holes, and this one's got the tuning screws. And this is the type that I prefer, but these are not terribly common. It's also got the early type chain cover, sprocket cover. But apart from that, it goes almost the same. It's a good saw, but it's an MS362CQ, and that may well not be what you've heard of before. Let me show you why. This is the original backhand and fuel tank kit, and you can see it's got a very big lockout. So this basically locks the trigger. So unless that's pressed and your hand's on there properly, you can't pull the trigger. You see? Whereas this one is exactly the same. But it does something else too. It won't pressed out at the moment because it hasn't got all its bits. But you can see that this is different. The back handle as a whole is very slightly different. And it's got this cable here that connects to the chain brake, which is under there, so that when this is released, it's basically got a soft stop. Instead of when you put the chain brake on, it stops with a bang, because it's either kicked back and triggered this, or you press too hard on it, or it's tried to kick back in the wood and you want it to stop in a hurry. If you do that all the time, especially when you've got revs on, if you're say cutting up in conifer tops and you're on a piece rate, and you should be doing that every time you move your feet, that's what they teach you, well, at least in the UK, a lot of wear and tear on the chain brake. And of course, when is it going to fail? When you need it. So this Hammond Framis here was designed to soft stop when you take your hand off, so it wears the chain brake less. But I wanted a saw that was standard, so I converted it back. And this come off of eBay, and we put that on there. The only thing we had to do was add an abutment for this stuff here. So we added an abutment there. Is it there? Anyway, it's one of these that you have to add. It's here. You see this this lump? This one, the CQ, has got a drilling. It's got one of these. So I stole one from another saw and plonked it in. So, right, stop it there and come back. This is the MS362CQ. Thank you, James, that was a handsome gift. And when I put the back handle on, so changed it back to standard, to usual, I gave it a full birthday and basically gave it a service. One of the things that I always do with a saw that's new to me, because I'm paranoid, is take the exhaust off. Like that. And you take that off and you look in the exhaust port and you look at the front face of the piston, exhaust face. And this is what I found. This was a running saw. That's the exhaust face. And you can see that's pretty scored, and the scoring goes up through the piston ring. So what I did was to plonk a new top end on it, or a top end that was quite worn. We'll look at that in a minute, but before we do that, if we look in the cylinder, hopefully you can see the scoring in there. That's possibly savable, but as well as transfer of aluminium off the face of the piston onto the nicker sill, you've got a little bit of scoring. By the time you've taken most of that out, you're going to have basically the equivalent of wear. Even though, as you can see from the piston itself, see all the machining marks here? Still don't have to put machining marks like that in the saw, in the piston. They do that to help retention of oil. But all these in here are quite pronounced. They're starting to wear away at the bottom of the piston there, because it starts to rock a little bit. But on this side, ignore these tram lines, you've got machining marks in there as well. So this is a low hours saw, or not huge hours saw. So what I did was I put a new piston on, piston and barrel, and they came as a pair from a saw that had been running. And through the magic of video, here's the barrel and piston that I put on. If you look in the top, you'll see that it's got a small diameter spark plug, whereas the old one has got a big spark plug. And that's one of the differences between the MS362CM and the MS362C. So I plonked this on because I was in a rush and I had a week's work in Surrey. Thank you for the work, James. And I wanted a backup saw to my little 350. And you can see on here, machining marks are gone. And hopefully, with the eye of faith and the GoPro, you can see a little bit of shininess on this end. And basically, this is a pretty worn piston. And what I found was it gave good power, original rings in the original bore, so they're like a matched pair and they're worn in. And basically it gave good power, but it rattled. It had piston slap. This one has got a less hours barrel and piston on it now. It's got new rings. And you can see I cleaned it up fairly roughly because, as I say, I was in a hurry. Plonked it back in, and that did me 2 weeks work. Basically I needed it as a backup saw because my 350 had issues. So this is the barrel with a worn piston. Can't really see with the GoPro, but if I was to run a glaze buster down there, or a ball hone, and put in a new piston and new rings, that would still give many hours of excellent service. I'll show you all these in a minute because these have all got various issues. But before that, we'll go back to this saw, which is a Frankenstein saw. That's not to say there's anything wrong with it. Basically it's put together with all the best bits from a large quantity of saws which have been written off for various reasons. This is new, pull start coil's new, this side cover's new, it's got 2 new piston rings because these are wearing surfaces and the rings wear. Piston wears, the barrel wears less. So it's got new rings, a good low hours piston, with all the machining marks on it. It's got new main bearings and new main seals. So the main bearings are, we should have got this out beforehand. They're the two bearings which the crank runs on. This one in here has got both of them. Right, three hands, sorry about that. So that's the clutch side, that's the generator side, and you can see that they're different. This one has the oil seal integral with the bearing. It's part of the bearing, although you can remove it and change it. And this one has the oil seal outboard in the crankcase, like that. What happens with Stihls do it more than Husqvarna's, is that on this side, as you can see with this one prepared earlier, didn't prepare it as well as I should have, because I should have taken this nut off. If you look in there, you see a lot of black. Tin Man calls it mung. So yeah, full of black mung. And this bearing, whilst not knackered, has got quite a lot of crud in it, or mung. And that basically gets pushed in past the oil seal into the bearing. Same happens on the other side, on a lesser extent to these Stihls. And eventually it'll get into the combustion space and into the big end. This is the big end, this is the little end. And especially if it's a little bit lean as well, it could cause the thing to basically have an air leak on this side and nip up, which you can see has happened on this one. This is the exhaust face, and that's basically started. Get symptoms of lube starvation by running hot, the mixture leading out with an air leak. This is the inlet face, and that's in reasonable nick. And you can see in here, you can see all that transfer screw cylinder. This saw died because of this. See that on my fingernail? You can see all the pitting on there. That's the bearing surface that the clutch runs on. And that's fairly badly worn. You can see wear lines top and bottom. And what happens with this is it gets starved of lubrication, because lubrication for here is basically hit and miss lubrication from the chain oil, and this is inside a rotating and quickly rotating mass, which basically tends to fling the oil away. If you're cutting dry wood, or if you're using a blunt chain, then most of the oil that's spare from lubing the chain tends to get soaked up by sawdust. So this gets starved of lubrication, it gets hot, and the clutch drum bearing surface tends to spoil away. That produces lumps of metal which get in the bearing, and then they damage this surface here. To change that bearing surface, you need to change the crank. If you run that in a work situation, knowing there's an issue like this, and having clutch drums wear quickly, if you don't catch them before they fail, you get an issue where this nice sharp straight-sided circlip groove wears. I've got a crank here where it's worn. You can see that especially on that outside surface you've got a chamfer that's worn onto it. It's got wider than it should be, and what can happen is that the clutch starts to rock, especially when the bearing wears, and it wears on here and the bearing surface in the clutch drum, and that puts pressure on the circlip. The whole thing can flick off, and the whole of the clutch drum and the chain can come out the side of the saw, and that can cause a pretty catastrophic failure, and it can cause injury. So because of the wear on here, this crank is dead, even though this surface is actually relatively good. That wear before that is unusual. Pause there. And this crank, with its slightly worn circlip groove, has got bad spalling on here, and take my word for it, you can feel that is rough. It's also very slightly straw coloured, so that's been hot, and if it gets too hot, things get worse and go downhill fairly quickly. Apart from that, there's nothing wrong with this crank, but that's enough in a work situation to write off this saw. Right, these saws are also written off. This is basically to show you issues with saws that you can get with selective assembly, because that saw was done with the best bits. Any bits that have an issue with them, or an incipient issue, don't get built into a rebuilt saw. So this crankcase, broken here, broken here. It's not a material problem if you know about it, but with this breakage here, see this crack, see the bend, that's an issue. So this saw has been plonked down on hard surfaces many times. You can see damage here as well. But this again was a running saw, and that probably died because it had a crank issue. So that's that one. This one here, same issues, although this is a slightly better crankcase. It's also got a lot of corrosion in here. This is the left hand side, and you can see it's broken out at the front, broken out here. The other side was broken as well, and this was a running saw, and this cylinder came off of this one, basically got dropped out of a cherry picker onto a hard surface. Let's move him, and this piston came out of it. This hasn't been cleaned up. Running saw was running well, making good power. It's low hours. You can see all the machining marks, but you can see all this black. This is blow by. This is basically combustion gases which travel past the rings, which you might be able to see, and also got machining marks on them. But if you turn it round, you can see this side is slightly more worn. The machining marks, although they're on the back side of the rings, they've gone through the intake side. So this is starting to wear, but those rings you could use again. This piston you could use again. But this blow-by is basically partly caused, you'll get some during normal running, by running it hard and running it at peak revs from cold. Let's have a look at some more of these. This one says OK on it, look. This is the one that was worn, but makes good power, which we saw a little while ago, which with a new piston, new rings, you could use with this barrel. So that's a good one. That's a late one, because it's got a small spark plug. This one here is the one that came off this saw, and it's been seized. So that one you could bring the barrel back with a lot of time, but in terms of rebuilding saws, no, not worth the time and the effort. Because if I'm rebuilding a saw for a firm, or for this firm, I charge a flat rate of 150 quid. And that pays for a day of my labour. That's in addition to the parts that I have to buy. That came out of their stock. Looking at more of these, this one says, that's the one we just saw, which came off of that saw originally, or sorry, the one that got dropped, that one. So that's a good one that you could use. This one here says C plug. Why does it say that? Oh yes, you can see that the plug thread's gone. So that probably put its plug into orbit and out the top of the saw. But apart from that, it's a good barrel. You could helicoil that. But this is an early one from an MS362C rather than a CM. So that's probably dead. Won't get reused. This one here, that's the one we saw a little while ago, and is seized. Nipped up badly. So that was dead as well. This one here, the AV mount's gone, and this is an early one, so it's a big fat plug, as opposed to a small diameter plug. That one. Did we look at those? Oh yes, this one says Mr. Vibes, came off a saw that was vibrating incredibly much. And what had happened, I don't know how it was running, the 4 bolts holding the cylinder down to the deck on the crankcase were all loose. Now this piston got a little bit of issue on the intake side. You can see where the rings are. This is debris coming in via the carburetor, so that's a dirty air filter. But that, amazingly, is actually usable, but it's off an early saw. That one we've looked at. So what I've just done with this is done the break-in procedure. I shan't show you loads of photos of me cutting through big long lumps of tree. I've cut all this basically as a tank of fuel on that saw because I wanted to bed it in, or break it in. If you look at Tinman's saws break-in videos, I follow a very similar procedure to him, although I didn't learn it off of him. So it started gradual because you're using new rings. In the case of this saw, I've got a different piston in a good cylinder, so the wear patterns on the cylinder and the piston are going to be different. The rings need to break in to the cylinder. I did plate clutch the cylinder first. You need to run it in gently, don't hit it hard right from the first. So I've run a tank of fuel through that. It's now ready to go back to its owners. So they've basically got a rebuilt saw that should last at least a year, even though their guys don't treat their saws very well. The cost of these is new, with all the discounts you can get is about 700 quid. That ain't too bad. Right, I'll end that video there, and I hope that's been interesting and informative. I'll put all this away. It starts to rain again.